Ruston's house.
You're watching the Law News Network. Aaron Keller along with you for the afternoon. And however late we go this evening, the Holly Bobo jury is still in verdict watch. They're deliberating, and there's been a few comings and goings in the courtroom, but nothing official about a verdict being anywhere close at this hour. They got the case at about 10 after 4 Eastern time yesterday. They're about an hour behind us. It's 3:10 yesterday. And they deliberated for a couple of hours yesterday before coming back first thing this morning. We're going to take some of your questions about the case as best we can. Ken Belkin is here along with us, LawNewz trial analyst, criminal defense attorney. And Cathy Russon, our senior trial producer, is joining us from out west. So we will take as many questions as we are able to answer, keeping in mind that I do not, nor do any of us, have the entire case file, which at this point is probably 20,000 pages long, in front of us. So
it's at home under your pillow.
It's not, actually. I wish I had access to it too, because this is another one of those cases that just is going to generate question after question. So I'll throw this one on the table first. Did Clint Bobo know the defendants before Holly Bobo was kidnapped? That's the first part of it. It's a two-part question, and I know, Ken, you'll object if I ask a two-part question, so we'll throw that on the table first.
Okay, so I've asked around about if anyone has personal knowledge that they were friends or really knew each other. The answers I'm getting are, in this small town, everyone knew everyone. And we do know that the Bobos knew of Zach Adams because they went out to his place. And so, but as far as a personal connection between Clint and the defendants, that personal connection hasn't been made, except that Jason Autry on the stand testified that Zach Adams told him that he went over that morning to teach Clint how to make meth. Now, that's the only statement we have of that, and we have no idea if that's credible or not.
Now, hold on. If everyone in this town knows everybody and everybody's talking to everybody, how come the prosecution could not get a single witness without a criminal record, or a drug abuse problem, or a documented history of dishonesty to testify in this case? It's a little bit ridiculous.
Well,
I'm in agreement with Ken. So
yeah,
Cathy,
at least one clean witness. Come on, one clean witness.
Okay, so we had this talk a little bit off camera. My opinion is, especially when it comes to Zach Adams, Jason Autry, Shane Austin, Dillman Adams, I don't think they have any clean, nice people in their life. Now, I'm not going to say I should have said that because his grandpa, testified, but sounds like he was also a real enabler. But every one of their peers seems to be involved in drugs, and that everything is there's a big drug problem in that county. Now, we have heard from locals in our chat room saying that this is true, that there is a big drug problem, although I'd say the epidemic is countrywide at this point.
Well, it is, and look, I mean,
But
we've heard some of the local reporters complaining that look, this is the upshot of this sort of thing. I hear that coming out of the local journalists, and I'll defer to them on their understanding of the local scene, but I don't think that that's in any way an excuse for what's going on here. My take on the core question here is did the defendants and Clint Bobo know one another? We know from testimony that the family knew them, but you got to also keep in mind that Holly Bobo's mother, at a minimum, was a teacher, and a lot of people knew them from school. We heard a lot of witnesses say that. So,
well, Zach Adams was one of her students in 4th grade.
Mm-hmm. But whether the brother directly knew them, maybe, but I haven't seen the direct evidence of it myself, and I say that with a caveat that I haven't seen every single scrap of evidence in this case.
Right.
I mean, everyone knows everyone in this town, and everyone's preconceived notion about Zach Adams and his crew of people is that these are the scoundrels, these are the reprobates, these are the people that we need to sort of get out of our society and our town. And I think, we have to be careful that this proceeding not be governed by the passions of the community in their thirst for vengeance for the death of Holly Bobo and maybe their disdain for Zach Adams and his crew, but that this proceeding be governed by the evidence, and we hold the prosecution to their burden that they have to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And every witness that they've put forward has significant credibility issues.
I mean, I'll second Ken on that, because it seems to me that the way that
Aaron
they
agrees with
came
me for once.
I agree with you more often than not. So I just would never admit it to you. So, I mean, look, it sounded a lot like the usual suspects, and I've said that over and over again. We get these questions on the stand. Hey, well, how did you come to focus on them? Well, everybody was talking about him, so we figured we'd go check him out. Well, that sounds like round up the usual suspects.
Okay, here's my thing. So you're like, why didn't they bring anybody that doesn't have a criminal past, that isn't a drug addict, to say that Zach Adams told him something? From the looks of it, Zach Adams wasn't talking to anyone in his life that wasn't a character like that. He wasn't going up to this great, credible friend because it doesn't appear he had any great, credible friends. So he wasn't talking about what he did to what we'd say, people that don't have a criminal past, that aren't on drugs. That's why the prosecutor had to work with what the prosecutor had.
So, Cathy, what do you think? Is he going down all the way, all charges?
I believe that you're either going to have guilty. I believe that this will not be a not guilty, okay? What I don't know is if they will be in there debating the different charges, the different degrees of the charges, and if that's going to hold them up. I personally, now that everything is in, I believe Zach Adams is guilty.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think he's guilty too. I just don't know if I think it beyond a reasonable doubt, because that's really the standard.
Well, and it's a standard that I don't think that the defense argued very well at trial, and that's just what makes me so nervous about this. And I keep going back to this, and I will keep saying it over and over again until I'm blue in the face. It seems to me more likely than not that Zach Adams, this defendant, was involved in this whole thing. But the question is, what did he do? When did he do it? And can it be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? And the process has not filtered this out, in my mind, in a way that makes me comfortable about any possible outcome in this case. If this jury looks and says it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, we ought to acquit him, I'm going to look at it and say, if the process were followed a little bit better, maybe they would have gotten a conviction. And if the flip side happens and the jury turns around and says, we're going to do the opposite thing, I'm going to look and say, well, if the process had been better, it might have resulted in the opposite outcome. I'm just not comfortable about the process in this case. The facts are a mess.
I just want to put this out there. Sorry. For those of you watching me, my eyes are going everywhere because I'm trying to make sure we're not missing any action in the courtroom. I'm also picking up additional questions from the viewers. And Jay Johnson is a local attorney there, and he's been doing a lot of tweeting during this case. And he just tweeted to us saying there's a reason why the usual suspects are the usual suspects.
Well, that's all well and good. And look, I mean, I will...
There's a reason the usual suspects are the usual suspects. You're starting an investigation from a preconceived notion of guilt. That's not an objective investigation. That's not an investigation that's likely to yield an accurate outcome.
Well, come on, Ken. The team, they were on Terry Britt. The lead investigator was on Terry Britt the whole time. So he didn't even care about the usual suspects when this case started.
Not him, but the first people on the scene were testifying that they started kind of going this way a little bit. And look, I mean, the local attorney who wants to sit and take swipes on Twitter at LawNewz has also refused our invitation to come on here and argue the case the way he sees it. So
hey, I don't think he's taking a swipe.
I mean, if he wants to come on here and express,
Aaron is very easily swiped.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
We haven't been able to get him on, so I'm defending him.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, his opinion is invalid because he won't come on here and defend it. So
yeah,
end
but
of that.
Problem,
end of that.
Round up the usual suspects. You're starting this investigation from the end and working it backwards. I'm pretty sure if I thought Aaron Keller killed Holly Bobo, I could work that investigation backwards and come up with a reasonable argument that he's guilty of it.
Well,
even though I've never been in Tennessee that I can recall. So.
Well, you got an alibi defense, Aaron.
Hey, look, one of the first things they did when a young, pretty girl went missing is they went to all the sex offenders in the area and started talking to them. They didn't just go and hone in on the guy that's on trial right now.
But look, he was a person of interest at first, then he's eliminated, then his ex-girlfriend, Zachary Adams' ex-girlfriend, they break up, and she decides to call the TBI and say, look, my ex-boyfriend made some untoward comments about the death of Holly Bobo. And then all of a sudden, he's suspect number one. And again, I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just saying the evidence needs to be there, and it needs to be there to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, we've known all along there isn't a ton of evidence. There's not evidence linking him directly to this except for a lot of people talking.
A lot of snitches.
Right, well, yes. But again, that's who's in Zach Adams' life. So that's who's going to talk.
Okay, let's move on to the next question here. One of the second part of this question that we went on and then went off all these tangents about is, do you think Clint will speak openly post-verdict? Only he can answer that. I don't know.
I don't know, man. He's getting slammed for sure on social media. And I don't want to say slammed, but because of what, just to back up, Jason Autry said that Zach Adams told Jason Autry that he'd gone over to the Bobo's house that morning to teach Clint how to make meth. Now, I have said all along that I have a problem with that statement because, I mean, you go over at 7 a.m. to teach someone to make meth when, you know, people could still be there at 7 a.m. It just seems to me, I don't know, I'm not a meth maker, but it seems to me that that isn't a very believable story. But it kind of came out of nowhere. However, the reason that people watching the trial have a lot of questions about Clint Bobo is because he was suspect at first, and he didn't care that Holly had left, and it took him a long time to even call 911. And if anything that Zach Adams said was true, if Zach Adams went over there that morning and Clint knew, that's a big problem. And I just don't really believe that he kept that a secret when he knew his sister was dead or at least kidnapped. I just don't believe it.
And didn't he first say that it appeared she was walking off with her boyfriend and not Zach Adams? So his story
yes, and that's
changed.
another question we have, I think, Aaron, from one of our viewers about the description.
Yeah, and I don't think that was ever completely cleared up at trial, at least not to my satisfaction. But, you know, as to Clint Bobo, you know, look, it's been written off in the history books that he was just confused about what was going on, and apparently that's just where it's being left. I mean, I don't know if any litigation is going to dig into this. And
I mean,
so let's ask the question as to why it was not dug into further. My suspicion is that you know, the defense didn't want to needle into it any further because it ultimately would have implicated this defendant further. So the defense isn't going to needle into the theory anymore. And we had one of the local radio news directors from Tennessee on the show yesterday here, and he said that he doesn't buy that theory at all, but just believes it was Jason Autry lying on the stand to sort of fire a shot at the Bobos and say, you know, I've got some dirt on you, and maybe this isn't the dirt, but either keep quiet or I'll release the real dirt, which I guess is plausible. But, you know, again, then it turns into another big question. Is Jason Autry, the star witness, if he's up on the stand lying about that, what else is he lying about? He admitted he was a liar on the stand. You know, so once an admitted liar, what's he going to admit his lies about? What's he lying about and what's he not?
Yeah, the jury's going to have to weigh, you know, his credibility given the fact that he is an admitted liar. He has a history of dishonesty. And look, and circling back to Clint Bobo, you know, the brother of Holly Bobo, he said that he viewed her walking off with her boyfriend, not Zachary Adams. Then his story changed. That's an inconsistent statement. There's a lot of things the defense, I think, could have done better, and I hate to criticize them because when you're on trial and you're in that position, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, and you're maybe not always on your A game. But she should have hammered in on those inconsistencies. She should have certainly gone much harder on the credibility of those cooperators and jailhouse snitches.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that the cross-examination of Autry was pathetic. It was worthless almost. It was one shade away from worthless. It was one hair away from being pointless. So, you know, look, I mean, Autry wound up charming the jury by being an admitted liar and claiming that he's the one that picked the spot where they were going to dispose of the body.
Maybe he charmed the jury. We don't know that he charmed the jury. But
well, people are sitting in the courtroom, Cathy, kind of laughing along with him and chuckling with him and this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, he comes, that's the reaction he got out of that courtroom.
Well, I'll tell you, on direct examination, he didn't have me chuckling when he says he's got the body in the back of the truck and that GDB starts moving her feet. I mean, what a creep. What a total, complete loser. Her parents are in the courtroom when he's describing their daughter like that and calling her that word.
Yeah,
you know?
disgusting.
So that wasn't charming at all. Although I did talk to you the other day on air about how that's how I felt on direct. And then on cross, he started to become a little more likable to me. He was sort of like holding his own. He wasn't getting flustered. He was kind of just good old boy talking to the defense.
Well, yeah, and he had a response for every single thing that came out of the defense attorney's mouth. She's like, well, why is your phone always circling around this scene? And he's like, well, there's this old redneck bar and they stay open as long as you've got money. And everybody just starts laughing, I think including the judge. you know, and that's his answer for why he's all over the scene where he said that they disposed the body. So I don't know, is that the real reason, or was that just his calculated plan to try to say, oh yeah, it really was this defendant, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't me, even though my cell phone's all over the area?
I mean, the prosecutor might as well have had their hand up this guy's butt and playing him like a ventriloquist, because he would say whatever he has to say to avoid the death penalty, as would anyone in that position, quite frankly.
I mean, of course. You know, the defense kept bringing up that he bargained away the death penalty. I don't know what the term was that she used. She said it several times about what he sold. He sold his death penalty to the state. And of course we know that. See, this is going to be exactly what the jurors, I'm assuming, are talking about in there, is the credibility of the state's star witness. There's definitely problems there. I said the other day, the story about him saying, you know, months before this, I saw a dead body floating in the Tennessee River. And I knew that the gases from that, and the guts and gases were holding that body up. I'm like, what? Where is this coming from? And they asked him, the defense, like, did you ever follow up to find out who the dead body was? Although I said this the other day on air, and I had somebody from the area send me a tweet and said, you don't know this area very well, because dead bodies do show up in the Tennessee River. So I don't know. But there's a lot of things about Autry's testimony that are unbelievable, but then I think there are things that are believable, and that's exactly what the jury is going to have to wade through.
Yeah, exactly. So let's move on to another question we have now. This one says, I'm curious, will the Holly Bobo jury be sequestered for the penalty phase if it's needed? In other words, if there is a conviction on the murder charge and then we need to move into the death penalty phase. I'd be shocked if they're not sequestered for that.
No, they absolutely will be sequestered, because this is a sequestered jury, and that's not going to change moving the penalty phase. The penalty phase might be, I don't know, a day or two. Depends on how many witnesses they put up, and then they'll have to deliberate again. But yeah, for sure they're going to continue to be sequestered.
Yeah, I would see no reason why not. You know, they've been sequestered thus far. They've got to keep them under lock and key. There's so much media attention, so much community attention on this. They have to be sequestered.
Yeah, another question here. Did Autry, the key witness who we've been talking about here, have the opportunity to know ahead of time about the bullet to Holly Bobo's head? That is a fact that I have not had a chance to dig into.
So the reason for this question is her skull wasn't found. Her remains weren't found for, you know, for a long time. So for all those years, only the killers would know that she'd been shot in the head, right? Mm-hmm. Before the remain, and so what I have from my notes about Zach Adams, the prosecutor says in their closing that Zach Adams told inmates in March of 2014, saying something like, you know, the cops don't have no gun, something like that. He mentions a gun then. This is before her remains are found.
Told inmates, though.
Yes,
yeah, told
inmates that aren't credible. I get it.
Okay. So let me settle this right now, because this is something criminal defense attorneys have to deal with all the time, and prosecutors have to deal with all the time. Almost every single time somebody gets locked up on suspicion of anything, all of a sudden everybody else in the jail wants to testify against them. Correct, Ken?
I mean, look, if you can reduce your sentence by throwing another convict under the bus, it's a dog-eat-dog world on the inside of a prison.
No, that's true. You know, we see this in a lot of trials. We see a lot of witnesses getting up there in their jail garb and shackled to testify. And so I covered the Martin McNeil case that's here in Utah a few years ago. Very high-profile case.
Yeah, went to law school with his son, who committed suicide first year of law school.
Yes. So anyway, that's interesting. I'll talk to you off camera about that, because I know that family now. So he, anyway. One of the best pieces of evidence against him was an inmate that he was in a federal prison on different charges while they were trying to charge him on the murder, and this federal inmate comes and testifies about the whole confession, that he confessed. Well, after the jury was interviewed after, and we spoke with the jury after, they said they had 4 inmates. We had in that trial 4 inmates testified against him. They said they threw out all the inmate testimony. They said they didn't even care about any of that. They didn't know if they were credible or not. And that was the main confession. And according to that jury, they didn't believe inmates and just didn't even want to talk about their testimony.
Yeah. Well, let's let's just say it this way. I think that the defense did a pathetic job,
Oh man, you're really being
a pathetic job
Aaron.
of pointing this whole problem out. Why was this not the exhibit A of the defense case? Instead, the defense is trying to say, oh, well, there might have been these other suspects and blah, 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 blah. Well, then it just sounds like the defense is trying to put on its own version of the prosecution. The defense attorney sounded like a prosecutor, trying to prosecute somebody else for the case. That's not the defense attorney.
Wasn't she a former prosecutor?
I don't know her whole background. I thought that she came from computer programming or something like that, but it sounded like she was trying to...
Sounded like she's programming a computer when she gave her closing.
Look, it sounded like she was trying to prosecute these other people who weren't charged. And it's just like, okay, look, the question is, first of all, the state has the burden. Second of all, the state's key witnesses are a bunch of admitted liars, and her cross-examination of the key witness made him look like a better guy than he looked on the state's case in chief. That's ridiculous.
Look,
it's the most pathetic excuse for defense lawyering that I've seen
Oh
in
my
forever.
God, Aaron, you are really
Forever.
ripping into her.
Well, come on. I mean,
Look.
if the client's life is at stake,
Yeah,
then
have some
she's
passion.
falling down all over the place.
Yeah,
falling down
Times
all
I
over the
comment
place.
off air to you, Aaron, and say she just asked another question that she doesn't know the answer to. She did that. She did that multiple times in this trial. That's
the
lawyer
first
101.
Yeah, first rule of cross-examination: do not ask a question you don't know the answer to. And by the way, look, the serious lack of passion there. She's what our president would call a very low-energy defense attorney. Not that I'm one for quoting him in an admiring fashion.
Let it be known that Ken Belkin is fond of Donald Trump.
No, let it not be known.
So
he was a former trial opponent of mine, actually, but that's neither here nor there. But look, she definitely had low energy. She was not enthusiastic, and look, I could see why. This is a client. He's really a terrible human being, and he's accused of the most heinous acts another person could commit, and she's probably reasonably certain of his guilt given what she knows and what he said to her in an attorney-client privileged environment.
well, I mean, if that's the case, then she needs to withdraw. Or
Well,
she needs
yeah,
to get
that's
out of it
exactly
somehow.
my point. If you can't do the job and advocate for your client zealously, no matter how bad the allegations are, you need to find another line of work, because
I mean, how
that's
many
your
defense
job.
attorneys believe their client's guilty? A lot.
I mean, I'm not naive. I know when a client's guilty. But in fact, one of my mentors said the worst client to have is an innocent client, because then you really have to bring it home.
Well, look, I mean, like I said this yesterday, I'll keep saying it again, day after day after day. Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but most criminal defense attorneys who I know personally, and that I'm closer friends with than I am with you, Ken, will tell me that they do the job not because they're necessarily there to try to get that guy off the hook, but because they believe very fervently that the government needs to be held to its burden every single time.
Absolutely.
Because if not, then we're going to go back to what we fought against in the revolution. We're just going to have a king rounding the usual suspects up, to use that line again, throwing people in jail without proof. And that's why they do it. So if you approach the work from that perspective, yeah, you get up there and you say to Jason Autry, you're an admitted liar, right?
Yeah,
well,
she did
you
not
just
do
said
that.
that you were, and that just should have gone on and on. And you got up here and you took an oath. Well, this other time you said you were
Right.
telling the truth. Correct, yes, but you really were lying. Correct. And then this other time where you said you were telling the truth. Correct. And you were lying, and just over and over and over until the prosecution objects, and then you try to keep going until the judge finally shuts you up. And I saw none of that. She could have
Hey, look.
destroyed this guy's testimony, and she let him walk all over. She let
Yeah.
him steamroll her.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. Anyone that's followed me for a long time knows that I am a defender of defense attorneys. And I
Well, thank you
actually,
for
in
that.
most,
Not many people are.
In most cases, like in our chat room, I'm the one always arguing the defense side, because I firmly believe in our system. I believe that the prosecutors need to prove their case. I want to go into a trial with the presumption of innocence. I can't always do that because sometimes I know a lot more than jurors know. But in this case, I mean, come on, we've seen some fantastic defense attorneys that would have just been hitting him. All of these witnesses.
I would have hit him. Oh my God. Deborah Blum would have hit him. Julie Rendelman would have literally hit him.
It's possible. It's possible. But yeah, I mean, so look, a lot of this stuff goes back to, we're sitting here trying to figure out what really happened, and people sitting and watching are still all confused about what really happened. And if the advocacy had been better, I don't think we would be debating about this stuff.
Yeah,
I think that we would be pretty certainly clear about what happened.
Aaron, first of all, I'm not your closest defense attorney friend.
Hey, look, you invited me. You invited me to dinner, but you said I had to mispronounce somebody else's name in order to actually accept the invitation. And
I will neither confirm nor deny that. But look,
right.
to the point that defense attorneys get a bad rap. You know, we're called criminal defense attorneys. That may not be the most accurate moniker, because really what defense attorneys are doing, they're defending individuals' constitutional rights when they most need them defended, when their liberty is at stake. And that's what I think people sometimes forget when talking about defense attorneys.
No, I agree. I agree 100%, and I think a lot of defense attorneys get a bad rap.
Yeah, I'm going to move on to another question here. This one, do they normally, they meaning the jury, does the jury normally take a vote as soon as the deliberations start to see where everybody stands? My experience is that it just depends on the jury, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I had this question on Twitter where the person that asked about it said, are we to assume that they weren't all unanimous in guilty when they took the first vote? And my response was, not all juries take a first vote. So that is simply up to the jury if they want to do that or not. And we have seen cases where jurors have spoken after the fact, and some big cases or whatever, where someone said, look, I purposely voted not guilty in our very first vote because I wanted to make sure we still talked about this case while we were in here, things like that. So I'm not sure a first vote really matters that much anyway, but my understanding is it doesn't.
And look, we're not supposed to know what goes on in that jury room. Those deliberations are held in private, so there's really no way of knowing.
Sometimes in some states you can actually go and poll the jury afterwards and sort of get a sense of what went on. I don't know if Tennessee does that. I know that in New Hampshire, attorneys can contact jurors. Usually they do it by sending a letter. And oftentimes they say that the conversations are illuminating. So, it's different in every state.
We see it all the time. We see jurors speak out after cases. And they don't necessarily out fellow jurors by name.
I chase them down in the hallway to speak to them after the case is over.
Yeah. No, for sure. Now, in the Jodi Arias case, they outed the one lone holdout that wasn't going to give her death. And I was at that trial, and we were in the media room, and all the jurors came in except juror number 17, and they all said she wouldn't deliberate, and so that was very interesting that they were all over their one fellow juror.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up at least the 3-person question and answer session because, Ken, I know you need to run, despite I suspect that that's just conceding a loss.
I have to run away from you because you just potentially implicated me in something.
So, all right. Well, why don't we continue this on, Cathy, with a few more questions? Why don't we go back to some of the defense's closing argument here, and Cathy and I will be back in a second.